introduce basically who is turning out to be just an absolute hero in the pro-life fight. Tom Harvey was the one who originally started trying to get a question on the ballot to stop our tax dollars from paying for abortions, which is just a travesty. It's an absolute travesty that our money is being used to kill babies, and it's just an awful thing. Tom started in what was the first time? 2015.
Correct.
And he made a little bit of progress, and he didn't give up. And then he tried again, and we made a lot more progress, but we still didn't make it. And now he's a glutton for punishment. He's going to do it again. So I'd like to just introduce Tom, who's going to introduce David. So Tom, why don't you come on up and have the introduction. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Bill. Just briefly on this effort, before I introduce David, in, I think it was like 2013, I had this idea, I did some research and found out, at least in my opinion, the reason we're going nowhere, it seems, the pro-life issue in Massachusetts is because of a 1981 court decision which said that it's a constitutional right that abortions must be publicly funded for indigent women. So it's not an issue you can take to your legislature and tell them, you want to change this, because they could just say, hey, it's a right under the Constitution. So we have to go through the difficult process of amending the Constitution, not an easy thing to do. And I sent this around to a bunch of people that thought might pick up on it, but nobody did. So in 2015, I decided to try it myself. We collected through great volunteers, just not enough of them, collected about 30,000 signatures. We needed to get 65,000 roughly. 2 years later, in 2017, with the great help of Renew Mass Coalition, we got about 60,000 signatures. When we needed exactly 64,750. So we fell short by a little bit. We're going to be doing it again in the fall of 2019. So I hope all of you here can help out. We just need more help, and we can get it over the top. But I'd like to thank Renew Mass Coalition for all the great help that it provided in this last campaign. Regarding 40 Days for Life, which David Bereit founded in 2004 in Bryan College Station, Texas. He's affected me personally because I'm out there with the help of Rita Russo, I'm sure you all know, runs the campaign in Boston. And it's probably the most liberal place in Massachusetts. Planned Parenthood is right next to, first of all, it's in Boston, and the second of all, it's right next to the BU campus. So we get a lot of one-finger salutes while we're out there.
Which fingers?
Number one.
And a lot of smirks, and that's the way it is. But I participated, and as you probably know, it's a campaign that is twice a year, once in the fall and once during Lent in the spring, and it's a great effort. Now, David founded this in 2004, like I said, in College Station, and it's in case you don't know it, it's a prayerful, peaceful presence out in front of the local abortion clinic. Here it's at Planned Parenthood on Comm Ave in Boston. And we also have it in Worcester and in Springfield. And this was a small project originally, and through David's skill, this has grown into, he'll fill you with the stats. My stats may be a little bit outdated, but according to what I read about this 40 Days for Life, over 10,000 lives have been saved. Amazing. Maybe David can give you an update on that. I'm sure it's even more than that. 75 abortion workers have quit through the 40 Days of Life efforts. More than 500,000 volunteers, not only in this country, but around the world. This is, I think it's over, I have 24 other countries have 40 Days for Life. So David has really had this thing grown. He's no longer a part of it. I think he resigned as CEO in the year 2016, but he's still involved in other pro-life activities. And part of this effort is also fasting, which is a large part of the 40 Days effort. In 2013, David was awarded the prestigious John J. O'Connor Pro-Life Award from Legatus. He is married with 2 children, and with no further ado, I present David Bereit.
Well, good morning. Good morning. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Amen. It is such a joy to be back in Massachusetts and back in Boston. And I remember the very first time my family came here it was either the fall of 2007 or spring of 2008. It's still a bit fuzzy. We were traveling all over the country at the time. But we had an event here on the Common, and then got to go and just pray with different people here in the area. And my children were young at the time. This was 11 years ago, and we've come back a few different times. But then my most recent time prior to this, and I was just talking with Rita about it, was in the fall of 2016, right at the end of my 40 Days for Life season. My last official act was we did, I don't know what we were thinking, but we did this 50 states in 40 days tour. And we got a big bus, and we didn't drive to Hawaii or Alaska, those we had to fly to, but we went to 137 cities in 40 days. And we got to pull the big bus right up in front of the Planned Parenthood here and pray with Rita and so many other people. And so that was my last time in Boston, but now getting to be back. I love this city, and every time I was texting my wife and kids pictures of, oh my gosh, do you realize what important historical event happened right here? And they're like, just leave us alone, you're there, we're doing other things. But it is a joy to be back here. And it's also, we were talking at our table this morning about the work you're doing here for life, for family, for faith. This isn't an easy place to do it. But sometimes where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. And sometimes where it's the darkest, the light can pierce through the most. And so I want to thank you for being on the forefront of proclaiming our Lord in the midst of hostility, for standing up for life in the midst of challenges, for protecting marriage and family in the midst of opposition and hostility. Thank you for being Christ to Boston, to Massachusetts, and truly to the rest of our world. And I think really what it comes down to for each of us is recognizing that God is calling us to be the salt and light in our world today. And an example of that I was thinking of as I was praying about what to share this morning was a story that I read about of a young man who was a business owner in the early 1800s. And this young man was invited by a group of friends one night to go about 6 miles west of where he lived to a church called the Salem Church, because there was a guest pastor who was in doing a revival type of a gathering at the church. And so this young man was not a faithful person, and he didn't pray much or anything else, but he had no other plans that night. So he rode on a wagon with his friends over to the Salem Church that night. And on the way over, he was joking with his friends and having a wonderful time visiting with them. But when they arrived at the church, there were wagons and horses outside, and they could tell there was a big crowd. And they went inside, and sure enough, every seat in the pews was filled, and so they had to stand along the wall. And the reason why is because the guest preacher who was there doing this revival meeting was the Reverend Peter Akers. And Reverend Akers was known throughout this region for being a very gifted Bible preacher. Some said he was even a prophetic voice. And that night, the message that Reverend Akers delivered to the audience assembled there was on the dominion of Jesus Christ. And as he preached his sermon, his sermon went 3 hours that evening. Trust me, my talk this morning will not do the same. But as he preached his message, he shared that he believed the dominion of Christ could not come in America until America abolished her sin of slavery. And as he built out his message, he said, I really wish this were not so, but I do not believe America will end this injustice without likely a bitter and divisive war that will split our nation down the middle. But ultimately, I think God's grace will be greater, and I think the nation will be renewed and restored, and I think we will be able to overcome this great injustice. So towards the end of his message, Reverend Akers is getting really feverish and really into his sermon, and he says, who can tell but perhaps the very man that God may use to lead our nation through this strife may be in this very presence here tonight. Well, that young business owner standing against the wall had just started his law practice. The young man's name was Abraham Lincoln. And as he heard the words that night of Reverend Akers, they struck a chord in his heart. Well, that night on the wagon ride home, after the message, Lincoln was no longer joking with his friends, and somebody asked him, what did you think of Reverend Akers' sermon? He said, that is the most instructive sermon I've ever heard, and I believe that man truly is prophetic. Well, the next morning he walked into his law practice, and his new partner that he had formed a business with had not gone with him the night before and looked up at Lincoln and saw his very tired and haggard face and could tell that Lincoln had certainly not slept the night before. And he said, "Lincoln, what's the matter with you? Where have you been?" And Lincoln shared with him, having gone to the Salem church, he shared the message that Reverend Akers had preached. And then he said to his partner, "I cannot shake from myself the conviction that I shall play a role in helping to end this." As a young man, Abraham Lincoln knew that God had placed a call on his life. And as history shows, he spent the rest of his life answering that call to his very dying breath. Well, when we look at our world today, he was fighting the great injustice of his day, and we look at our world today, and we have some major challenges that we need to overcome in America. Amen? And just by a show of hands, how many of us at any point in the last couple of years have at any point thought that maybe America is heading a little bit in the wrong direction? Just by a show of hands. Good. I'm in the right crowd. So you are well served to feel that way, and honestly, research is showing us on so many different fronts that we have cause for great concern. A few years ago, as I started to just feel this great sense of we're really heading the wrong way, and I started to look at Gallup and all these other organizations that assess how do Americans feel about are we heading in the right direction. And right now, consistently, anywhere from 70 to 80% of Americans feel we're headed on the wrong track on so many different fronts. So I started to dig into this, and I started to look at the question of what has in the past, God, caused great civilizations or nations to fail. So once great civilizations that are no longer even in existence today, what caused them to decline and what caused them ultimately to fail? And I was fortunate, I'm not a historian, but I was fortunate to find that there were many others who had actually looked at some of these questions. 100 years ago, Oswald Spengler wrote a work, The Decline of the West, predicting a lot of the things we're now seeing happening before our eyes. There have been more recent works, When Nations Die by Jim Nelson Black. But essentially, a number of historians have looked at that question of what are the predictive indicators of a society heading downhill, and can they be turned around before it's too late? And what they found is there are many different factors that are at play, and each of the historians came up with a list of what they considered the factors, and here are some of the things. See if any of these sound vaguely familiar. An increase in lawlessness, a decrease in economic discipline, an increase in bureaucracy, a decrease in educational formation, a weakening of the cultural foundations, a loss of respect for the tradition and values that established the civilization, increased materialism, a government that lives off of moral decay, a population that fails to see or care about what's happening around them. Do any of those sound vaguely familiar? Now, those were some of the factors that different historians identified, but interestingly, every study of this question that I could find, every historian agreed on 4 points that they said were the leading causes of the death of a civilization. And they were the moral factors. And they were, number one, a decrease in religious beliefs and practices. Don't we see that around us? Our churches are much emptier than they used to be across every denominational and faith tradition background. There are certain little pockets of hope in the midst of that. But even so, those who do attend church, do their lives look that much different between the 2 Sundays in how they live versus those around them? Do they watch the same movies and television? Do they practice and do the same things? So people are falling away from that. The second factor that they identified was an increase in immorality. And particularly, they described sexual chaos and lewd living. And all you need to do is walk down the grocery store aisle and look at the magazine covers or turn on Netflix or Hulu for a few minutes, and you're just inundated with this. And we see this increase in immorality. The third factor they identified was the breakdown of the family. And we see increases in broken homes, young people waiting longer and longer to get married if they even get married at all. Cohabitation is the norm today. We look at the efforts to redefine and undermine what marriage and family is about in the first place. And here in Massachusetts, the laws that allow men to go into women's restrooms, is this not indicative of the problems that historians have said have caused other civilizations to fail? But the fourth of the moral factors, the fourth nail in the coffin, if you will, of a civilization, if not checked and stopped, was the devaluing of human life. And do we not see, since the 1973 Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton decisions, now more than 59 million American children have perished from abortion. We have seen every 30 seconds, as we're sitting here, another child made in God's image and likeness perishes from abortion. Another mother is wounded, some physically, but many more emotionally and spiritually and psychologically. At the forefront of that is an organization you know very well here in Massachusetts, Planned Parenthood, an organization founded by Margaret Sanger, a racist eugenicist who used to give talks at KKK rallies because she wanted to purify the race and get rid of those she deemed as unfit human weeds. And today, Planned Parenthood has grown to become the single largest abortion chain in the nation. Their latest annual report documented that they committed 321,848 abortions at their facilities while taking in more than $500 million taxpayer dollars. So you and I are funding an organization, $543.7 million a year, that is systematically destroying our nation's future. And as we saw through the undercover videos that David Daleiden released a year and a half ago, not only are they satisfied to destroy the lives of children and wound women, but then they cut up the little babies' body parts and sell them for profit. And this is an organization that is lauded as a women's health champion. And right here in Massachusetts, your Department of Health reports that in the last year, 17,901 children died from abortion on your watch. And the state funds taxpayer funding for abortion to the tune of $1.6 million per year. So if these are our greatest challenges, these moral factors, decrease in religious beliefs and practices, increase in immorality, the breakdown of the family, the devaluing of human life, how are we doing on those? We're not doing well. And honestly, I think what we need to recognize is if we cannot stop these factors, we will not have an America to hand on to our children and to our grandchildren. These are the factors that have led to the death, the destruction of entire civilizations, and they're rampant in our world today. And frankly, of those four, only one of those are we right now seeing some progress. And that is on the progress of the pro-life front. The talk here today is hope for the pro-life movement in Massachusetts. And I did not come to simply bring a message of despair. Because of all those four factors, we are seeing enormous progress right now. And I believe we are witnessing before our very eyes the beginning of the end of abortion. And so if we want to stem the tide of our civilization going down the tubes, I believe this is the opportunity we have through the pro-life movement. As the abortion numbers are going down, as more and more Americans are self-identifying as pro-life versus pro-choice, by now it's a 12-point majority of those self-identifying as pro-life. We see young people and women who are far more pro-life than men or the older generation. We see pregnancy centers that are spreading across the country, now outnumbering abortion facilities 3-to-1. Abortion centers reached their peak in 1991 with 2,200 across the country. Today there are fewer than 650. They are closing left and right. Fewer medical providers are willing to even engage in the practice of abortion. We are seeing more pro-life laws passed in the last 2 or 3 years than the previous 20 combined. We are seeing momentum. We are seeing progress. And my message to us today is that we have to embrace, we have to run towards this, and we have to, in my opinion, do everything we can to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, because if we do not, the family will continue to suffer. If we do not, we will not have a civilization for our next generation. And no different than the question that Reverend Akers posed when Abraham Lincoln was standing in the audience at that Salem church. Who can tell that perhaps the man or woman that God may use to bring an end to abortion in Boston, in Massachusetts, across the Commonwealth, throughout our nation, may be in this very room here today? And if it's not you, then who? And why aren't they already doing it? It is us. It is here. It is now. We are called for such a time as this so that we can make sure that what we hand on to our children and our grandchildren is a better city, is a better Commonwealth, is a better nation, and not one that is headed for decline. So what's it going to take? I think it's going to take two things. Number one, I think it's going to demand faith and trust in God Almighty. With man, we can't do this. You look at the challenge of abortion in Massachusetts, you look at the hostility in Boston, you could say, oh, we can't do this. You're right, you can't. But with God, all things are possible. So we must have faith and trust in Him. And secondly, it's going to require us putting that faith into action. It's going to require you and me doing whatever we can with the gifts, the talents that God has given us to be that voice for the voiceless. And when we bring those two things together, God and you, and we go into action, amazing things can happen. And I've seen it happen so many times.
I remember in 2004, my wife and I had a group of young couples over for a potluck dinner at our house. And when they were coming into our house, one of those young couples walked in. They were named David and Monica Araby. And as they walked into our house, Monica took their dish into the kitchen to join the other couples. But my friend David, as he walked in, he said, "Can I talk to you? There's something that's really burdening me, and I need to talk to somebody about it." And I said, "Sure." So he pulled me down my hall, back by my bedroom, and he said, "David, did you know the Planned Parenthood Abortion Center here just killed its 2000th child? It had only opened a few years earlier." And I said, "David, I'd heard that. It's terrible." He said, "It's more than terrible. Do you realize those are children knit together in a mother's womb in God's image and likeness that are dying in our town on our watch? Do you understand that?" I said, "David, yes, I get that." And he said, "Do you understand these babies? They're not the only victims. What about these women?" He said, "I've been driving by that Planned Parenthood facility and seen an ambulance pull up, and they haul a woman out on a gurney because they botched the abortion. A woman who was bleeding out. They couldn't even patch her back together, so they had to rush her to the hospital to save her life." He said, "Do you realize women are being wounded right here in our town on our watch?" I said, "David, I've heard some of the stories." "Yes." Then he leaned in and he said, "Then where is the church?" He said, "Why are our pulpits largely silent on this issue? Why are we not doing more about this? Why are we not treating this like the crisis that we say it is?" And I didn't have an answer for David. He said, "If we really believe what we say as people of faith, then we would do everything in our power to stop this injustice before it's too late." He said, "We would go to that place where children are dying. We would stand in the gap. We would drop to our knees and we would pray and we would beg God to end this killing." He said, "If we had to be out there 24 hours a day, we would do that if we really believe what we say." He said, "What do you think? Should we do that? Should we go out there 24 hours a day?" In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this guy is a nut. No, I don't want to do that. You go ahead and do that. I don't want to do that. But fortunately, my wife called from the kitchen and said, "It's dinner time." And I said, "Whew, I'm off the hook. I don't have to answer." And that was the end of the conversation. But that night, after everybody left, I tossed and turned all night in bed thinking about David's words. Why aren't we acting like this is the problem we say it is? Why aren't we willing to do whatever it takes to stand in the gap? And the next morning, I went into our little pro-life office, and there were 3 other people there, and I sat them around the wooden table in the center of the office, and I said, "What are we going to do about this?" I shared what David had shared the night before with me, and we decided to do something we should have done years earlier. We decided to pray for an hour and do nothing but ask God how we could respond to this problem. The first thing that we felt convicted we had to do was pray and fast. Because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And the fasting part, because we're told some demons can only be driven out through prayer and fasting. Now, it's easy to talk about fasting after we've just had a delicious breakfast, but we see different people fast in different ways, but we said this is something we've never tried, so let's pray and fast. The second thing we said we needed to do was David's crazy idea. What if we actually gathered in the public right-of-way outside of the Planned Parenthood, not to yell and condemn, but simply to pray and be available to those in a time of need? And the third idea was, what if we take this door to door and we go knocking on every door of every household in our community and invite people to be a part of the solution to this problem? And all of it seemed to us to be wrapped around a time frame of 40 days, because when you read in Scripture, that time frame shows up. And I went by myself and I went in and prepaid in cash because I didn't want her to chicken out and back out of the appointment. He said, then I came outside and I waited for her to show up. He said, she stood me up that morning, David. I tried to call her and she wouldn't return my calls. A few days went by. I tried to reach her through family and friends. Nobody would connect me. He said, I was so angry at her for standing me up at that abortion facility that day. He said, weeks went by and eventually everybody finds out she's pregnant. He's the dad. He said, David, they shamed us into getting married. He said, the woman I was so angry at that morning at the abortion facility, David, that was your mother. And he said, the child that I wanted to throw away to cover up my own sin, David, that was you. He said, little did I know on that morning outside of that abortion facility that the only person I wanted to get rid of in the whole world would be the only person standing by my side as I lay here dying. He said, David, will you pray with me for an end to abortion? And David did. Shortly after that, his father went home to be with the Lord, but it wasn't before David was changed. Because for him, it was no longer an abstract issue. It was no longer a Supreme Court debate, no longer a Sanctity of Human Life Sunday, one sermon a year. For David, it was life and death. It was personal. And because he made it personal, he prayed and asked God to show him, what can I do? And God gave him an idea. He shared that idea, then he put that idea into action, and because of one man making this personal, it has spread into what is now a worldwide movement, saving more than 14,000 lives, impacting people here in Massachusetts, where I don't think David Araby has ever even set foot, because one person made it personal. So here's my challenge. Here's my encouragement to each of us. Knowing what's at stake with our culture heading in decline rapidly, and knowing this issue, the devaluing of human life, is at the crux of everything, can we make it personal? Can we may not be survivors of an abortion like David Araby, but can we make it personal, knowing that people in our churches have been affected by abortion, people in our families, whether we know it or not, have been affected, people in our neighborhoods have been affected, and if we are willing to pray and ask God Almighty, what can I do? How can you use my talents, my gifts that you've given me? Then as he reveals it to us, we put that faith into action. That is when we will see our society shift directions. That is when we will see more lives saved. That is when we will see the number of abortions in Massachusetts go from 17,901 down to 0. But it requires faith in God, and it requires our action. So my encouragement to you is find your place. Discern your role. You may already be involved. Maybe you're involved in pregnancy centers, or maybe you're already involved in the 40 Days for Life, or maybe you're helping with Catholic radio, or maybe you're involved in protecting the family and also working on life issues. But today, ask God to show you what more can I do, and then do it as he reveals it to you. And then also when you see organizations like the Renew Mass Coalition that are fighting aggressively, when you see what Tom is doing as the petition effort starts, I think 3 times is the charm. 1 and 2, the 3rd time is the charm. But when you have the opportunity to stand with organizations and people who are doing heroic things, realize this is the time. God has called us for such a time as this, and we need to respond with tremendous faith. Whether it's voting no on the upcoming measure to remove the bathroom laws, whether it's working to strip the taxpayer funding from abortion, whether it's to work to donate in this important critical election year of 2018 to get good candidates elected. Find your place and then pour yourself, your time, your talent, your treasure in. This is not a time for timidity. This is not a time for us to just be passive and rest. This is a time for faith, and this is a time for action. Will it be easy? It will not. But it will be worth it. And I'll just share one final story to wrap this up, and then invite you to make one decision today to show how worth it is. When I came through on that bus tour here in Boston, I had no idea a blessing that awaited me at the end of that tour when we hit California. And we were in a city of West Covina, which is just east of Los Angeles. And at that stop, we had 400 people out at the rally, and people were gathered outside the abortion facility, and the event was in English and Spanish. It was a beautiful evening when we had that event. But at the end of the event, the host who was organizing it said, "David, we have a surprise for you. We'd like to invite somebody who's here to come and see you." And running out of the crowd came a 5-year-old girl named Leah. And I had met Leah 4.5 years earlier because she was one of those who had been saved by the abortion facility in neighboring La Puente, California, because of people praying outside of that facility. The mother had changed her mind. And she went to those people who helped her through the pregnancy, and even after she gave birth to this little baby Leah. And then the abortion facility where Leah had been scheduled to be aborted had gone out of business and closed and was one of those 96. And here, 4.5 years later, Leah, now a 5-year-old girl, came running over and gave me a huge hug. And we were inviting people to sign their names on the bus. And she went over and she put her name right next to the door handle. And every stop for the rest of that tour, when I would get on that vehicle or get off, I would see that signature of Leah, now a 5-year-old girl. And I realized all the problems, all the challenges were worth it just to meet her and to get that hug from her. So if you've not yet met a child who's alive because of your yes, because of your faith and your action, then I pray one day soon that you get to meet a little girl or a little boy who's going to grow up and affect future generations, because that's when you'll know how incredibly worth it this work is. So let's stay the course. Let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we're assured that we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. And my invitation for you, if you could, somebody's going to pass around these forms.
Well, it's recording right now, so.
Okay, so you'll delegate to someone else. Robert can't be in two places at once? I don't understand.
Come on.
We believe in you, Robert. So the sheets that are being handed around, first off, I want to thank all of you for being here this morning. You could be in many other places, and it was an investment of time and treasure already to be here. And I want to thank you and tell you the Renew Mass Coalition appreciates that more than they can express in words. But also, this is truly a critical election year, and there's a lot more to be done. And we're inviting you to prayerfully consider, and if you feel led, to make an investment or a commitment of an ongoing sustaining membership in the Renew Mass Coalition so that they can continue to do their work. I asked them, what are some of the things that you need help with? And they said, well, right now, we really need to work on developing the campaign training schools where we have instructors leading hands-on training. We need to be involved in voter outreach, door-knocking campaigns, fundraising, data management, social media campaigns, voter guides, the lobbying day on April 24th. Also, the ballot initiative, the Keep Massachusetts Safe by voting no on the measure to repeal the current bathroom and locker room law. Opponents have raised $350,000. So can we, not saying we have to meet that, but can we have faith and can we respond? Those trying to attack our values, can we at least support our values to the best of our ability? And also to prepare for the effort in 2019 to get taxpayer funding of abortion stripped away through modifying the Constitution. The bottom line is, can we stand together to fight for our Christian values? The devaluing of Christian beliefs and practices, the breakdown of the family, the increase in immorality, the attack on human life, that's what the Renew Massachusetts Coalition is all about. And if we can invest in this work to take it to a whole new level, I believe our efforts will yield tremendous fruit. So let's go to the Lord and just pray really briefly about this, and then if you feel led to respond to that, I would invite you to do just that. Dearest Heavenly Father, thank you for this time we have together on this glorious spring day. We thank you for calling us for such a time as this, and we know that where two or more gather in your name, you are present in our midst. We welcome your presence here today. Help us to know how we can be a part of the solution. As there are challenges, as clouds have rolled across this Commonwealth and across our nation, dear Lord, we ask that your light pierce through that, and that we become your hands and your feet and do everything we can to renew faith and values, to increase morality and virtue and holiness, to help rebuild and reignite marriage and family, and dear Lord, to protect and promote the dignity of every human life. Dear Lord, please bless the Renew Massachusetts Coalition, bless everyone who makes this work possible, and help us to know today how we can invest to take this work to a whole new level, to make an impact not only in this election year, but in the months and years beyond that, as we work to renew our culture completely. With you, we know all things are possible. Please show us how you would have us respond and help us not to be fearful and not to be weary, but to be renewed ourselves and to have great faith that with you we can do all things. And we ask this in your Son's most precious name.
Amen.
So if you feel led to invest a one-time gift, also there are opportunities down there if you'd like to pledge to be a sustaining member of a certain amount per month. Fill in your information, and then you can turn that in before the end of the event. And I'll just say that I believe through your faithfulness in protecting life and family and our faith, I believe one day when you do arrive in your heavenly home, you'll hear those beautiful words from our Maker, well done, good and faithful servant. God bless you, and thank you so much for being here.
I didn't mention he was a very successful salesman before getting involved in 40 Days for Life. So no surprise there. I hope he can come back in the fall of 2019 to get my volunteers all fired up, because what a great inspirational talk we just heard. So thank you, David.